Irish Dragon's Den star, shares some of the secrets of her successful career. Today I'm very excited to talk to Norah Casey. Norah's best known in Ireland for her role as a dragon on Dragon's Den. She's a self-made entrepreneur, a broadcaster, an author, a business mentor, and much more. Norah kindly shared her time to speak to me about her career and to share some of her expertise, her knowledge and experience. Norah shares so many tips. This episode is a must-see. Enjoy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome to the Self-Maker Show. This is your host, ConorLyn.ch. Hi Norah, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks. Yeah, I think there's a little yellow ball just about to appear in the sky.
Hopefully. It was lovely to talk to you. Thanks a million for your time. Just so people who are maybe watching from outside of Ireland, listening from outside of Ireland, who may not know you, could you tell us a little bit about your background and your story?
Okay, weird. And I'm also 90 years old. So strangely enough, I grew up in the Phoenix Park, which is an odd place to grow up. But my father was a ranger and so was my grandfather. So we live in a lodge there. And I don't think I fully appreciated how magical that was until I grew older. And, you know, there was 8 of us in a 3-bed house. My mother always says, don't do that Angela's Ashes moment. But nonetheless, it was magical. My father would open the back door. We would run like wild things around the Phoenix Park. I would say that my great love of animals and nature came from that period in my life. If you asked me when I was younger what was it going to be, it was a vet. I was virtually living in Dublin Zoo. We live right next to it. I was there morning, noon, night, weekends, every moment I could get. So how unlikely is it that I ended up doing what I'm doing? Partly we were surviving on an OPW wage, which wasn't great. And there were 8 of us. My mother was a nurse and had to give up when she got married. I went to a DESH school. So for those who don't know that, it's a school that's supported by the government because it's an associate disadvantaged area. Mine was in Stanhope Street in Stony Batter. I never met a businesswoman in my life, and I wouldn't have known to say I wanted to be a businesswoman because the closest was the woman outside the gates who sold in the shops. Like that was the closest to a businesswoman. In that school, there's 2 photos on the wall. One is of Joan Burton, who was the Taoiseach at one point, or the Deputy Prime Minister, and the other's of me. And I'm no spring chicken, and she isn't either. So I always think it's sad that, you know, a sad reflection maybe of our times that the 2 of us are on the wall. And I only say that in the context of people often think, well, hey, presto, you just got beamed down from outer space as a businesswoman or as an entrepreneur and a founder. But no, and even more unlikely, when I was 17, I went off to train as a nurse in Scotland on the banks of Loch Lomond. Pure serendipity. The guy who ran Parkgate Street, his daughter had fallen in love with a policeman in Scotland and was working in the hospital there, came home and gave the brochure to my dad. And I said, well, I'll do anything to get out of Ireland and the house at the moment. And I went off to Scotland. I think that nursing was the best foundation for a lot of my life. It's the reason why I have all sorts of subliminal communication skills that I trace back to at a very young age, being able to walk into a ward and perceive whether somebody needs to have their hand held or, you know, whether they're in pain. It was 5 years of my life that I would never swap, and I'm still very close to a lot of nurses. And in COVID, I've gone back to some of my nursing days, but it definitely wasn't for me for life. So if you're ambitious to get on, or you're an individual thinker, at that time that wasn't encouraged in nursing. There was a huge hierarchy, there was a lot of rules, and eventually I decided I would swap that out, and of all things went from being an angel, and most nurses would murder you for saying they're angels, but they are kind of, to being a Rottweiler, because I trained as a journalist. I did my postgrad in Harlow in the north of London, and I went on to do broadcasting and TV production and direction at Ealing College at night time for 2 years. And I did my radio with the BBC. So I settled into my 20s working mainly in, my main job being print. My first love is print. Ended up marrying a man who worked at the BBC, and his first love was radio, even though he worked across the two disciplines. But I was serving my medium miles between Sky at the weekend. I had a program on LBC on Sunday. So things people very rarely know about me is that was my life. But I was also hugely driven. In your 20s, you're supposed to be out there, partying, and it's all about you, and spending on yourself. I actually, by the time I was 30, I had started my MPhil at the University of Wales. I was a CEO before I was 30 and realized I was the worst one on the planet, really a bad CEO. And I went off to Ashridge Management College to study strategic management. Still, in my DNA, my life skill would be strategy. I went back actually a few years later and did advanced strategic management. So while I was being CEO of various media companies, I found myself working for Smurfits. So they, over the years, the chairman had bought publishing companies, and I was running 3 of them across Dublin and London and commuting all of the time. And in 2004, an opportunity came up for me to do an MBO, which I did. And so that began my journey, I guess, as a founder, as somebody who ran their own business, and as an investor, because over time I found I was making money and I wanted to invest in other businesses. So that's where I am right now.
That's great. Super career. That's great, great summary. So some of the highlights then were the MBO, but then since then that company, Harmonia, that's changed a lot as well, and your career has taken on a new direction, hasn't it?
I think I do remember in 2004, and it was around about this time of year, it was August, finally, signing the paperwork in the law, in the legal firm. And it had been a long process. It was about a year doing the MBO because the first one failed, not for any, the company was losing a lot of money at the time. I think neither of us felt we wanted to proceed. So second time round was much more comfortable. I'm a finance person myself, so I tend to do a lot of all my own finance work, and nobody can beat me in terms of zero budgeting and everything. So I found the second process much more comfortable for me. But I walked down Bagot Street feeling like I was on cloud 9, because it was that kind of moment when you have to pinch yourself and say, oh my God, like given where I came from and the unlikeliest of circumstances, that here I was walking away owning the single biggest magazine publishing company in Ireland, a big thing at that time. And I also had, great connections in the UK and in London, where I was for 20 years. So yeah, it was the most magical moment. I wouldn't underestimate, the business was in a really difficult place. And I think the year before the MBO, the losses were in the region of about 3 million. But within 3 years, and I'm not saying that as a blink of an eye, there was no holidays, there was long evenings, weekend working. I mortgaged my house, the family home, and but I had it up to 1.3 million in cumulative profits. And I just haven't ever been the kind of person who took money for the sake of it. I haven't taken a salary for nearly 3 years now, so because I don't want to take it out of the business, I'd rather employ other people. So I was trying to find new things. I was acquiring. We launched a lot of titles. I acquired a lot of titles, but I did feel I was acquiring all in my own space. Now, if I gave you $1 million, you wouldn't actually invest in magazines. But at that time, they were kind of still sexy and they were still selling. And we had almost all the number ones in the market. I had Food and Wine, I had Tatler, I had You. I had acquired Ireland with the welcomes from the Irish government at 120,000 US subscribers. So I had a whole plethora of them. And I wanted to branch out of that. It was my comfort zone. So actually going on Dragon's Den was probably the best thing for me, because I got to sit in an armchair, apart from saying I'm out in a grouchy face and with my arms folded. I also got the benefit of 50, 60 people coming in every season to pitch their ideas to us. So I was learning so much about other businesses, about sectors I'd never have dreamt investing in. And I think even in between Dragon's Den, I ran a business clinic. So I started to see businesses that wanted investment. From the first appointment would be 30 minutes, and I would do them every Thursday from like 7:30 in the morning till 6 in the evening. And if they were worthwhile, they'd come back for an hour long pitch the following week. So You know, when Malcolm Gladwell did
Mm.
Outliers and, said you have to do 10,000 hours. I mean, I have never worked out the hours, but it's well over 10,000
Yeah,
hours
yeah.
I have spent
Mm.
working with people who wanted to start their own business or people who
Yeah.
wanted to grow in that growth phase. So I'm always very grateful to Dragon's Den for doing that.
Mm.
I mean, I was an angel investor beforehand. I learned a huge amount about not backing the idea, but backing the person,
Yeah.
which is a huge learning. I would have had more fun throwing my money down the toilet,
Mm.
frankly, with some of
Yeah.
my investments, because
Yeah.
although the ideas were great, the person wasn't right. They just didn't have those traits of entrepreneurship that would have seen them
Yeah.
through.
Okay, could we explore that a bit more? Because that's really interesting about the person and their qualities, etc., that you obviously have, and then you perhaps look for these in other people's. Could you maybe
Yeah.
talk about that? The key
I,
success factors?
I kind of feel myself that if you don't possess those traits of entrepreneurship, and sadly most of them are laid down while we're quite young, um, I don't think you'll have the wherewithal to go on to run your own business. It's okay. There's a lot of need for employees. But for
Mm.
me, I think when I find people who are determined, who have all of those, if you look at whether whatever university it is, you generally down to about 7 traits, sometimes 5, sometimes 7. But it is always about, charisma, of course, good communication skills, resilience, determination. Confidence comes later in life. For me, I was not a confident person until I hit my 30s, really. So it's a learned skill. Adaptability also comes later in life. We talk a lot about
Mm.
failure as though it's a great badge of honor. I grew up in business when nobody talked about failure. Now we're shoving each other off the stage trying to tell people how
Yeah.
much we failed. But the real benefit of failure, which is nature's harshest but best teacher, is that we learn to adapt. And unless we have the benefit of sometimes things not going right, we don't go back
Mm.
over what went wrong, and we don't hone our thinking, and we don't become as flexible as we should be. My old chairman, who's gone
Mm.
now, God rest his soul, he used to say it's okay to fail, but fail fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, biggest mistake is clinging on to things that aren't working and
Yeah.
not continuing. So I think in Dragon's Den, everything is about the wow factor of the idea, the big reveal, and you can
Yeah.
only hear people. The enduring, compelling format is people at home on their sofa saying, "I could do that," or "You should invest in that," and
Mhm.
people are always stopping me and telling me what I should have done. But actually, the idea is nothing. I mean, apart from anything else, almost everybody embellishes the truth. That's the nicest way of putting it in Dragon's Den. So they're always talking about,
Mm.
these huge revenues, or you discover
Yeah.
afterwards there's an errant husband who owned a slice of the business that you didn't know about. So
Yeah.
due diligence was a big thing for me in Dragon's Den. But you also discovered that unless they were capable of taking both your money, but more importantly, your advice,
Mm.
they weren't ever going to get to the next level. But I'll tell you, one of the best things that I invested in Dragon's Den is still doing phenomenal work, is called Understairs Storage. And it was my
Mm.
last day in Dragon's Den.
Yeah.
And it was my last investment. And, I remember sitting there and Gavin Duffy, my fellow dragon, saying, "Go for it." He'd spent all his money on a pile of rubbish as usual. Sorry, that's the truth. And he said, "Go for it." But I was up against Sean O'Sullivan, who was another
Mm.
fellow dragon, US based. He was the inventor of Guitar Hero. And, Sean
Yeah.
has SOS Ventures. He's an engineer by background. And Bobby Kerr. I think neither of them spoke to me for months afterwards, because we ended up in this very big pitch battle with Paul Jacob, and happily Paul Jacob's an engineer and married to an
Mm.
engineer, so he came in with 80,000 turnover, which was incredible. That never happened in the Den. This great idea
Mm.
to do this understairs bit and make it into a wine rack or school bags or whatever. At the time, had a lot of fitters fitting it. So, in the middle of this pitch, I just remember, saying to him, because it was between me and Sean O'Sullivan, obviously, Paul, what you need in your business is another engineer. And, and that's why I think you should take Sean's money. So there was like moment of frantic horror in his face. He was going, "No, I'll go with you, Norah." So, um, but Paul
Yeah.
is now
Very good.
doing more in a week than he did in a
Mm.
year when I met him, and it's launched in the UK's Clever Closet. We now have it. He worked out the perfect pitch so
Yeah.
that it's
Yeah.
all flat packed, sent to Australia, Canada. We got second and third round funding in the UK, and even like, this is how great Paul is. Firstly, he sticks to the knitting. He's never veered
Mm.
from that understairs piece
Yeah.
and making it better and more, more user friendly for people. And then COVID happens, and within a nanosecond, he's up on LinkedIn with the 60-second desk, which he, being an engineer, perfects. And there it is, up, pop it up, use it, put it down, but under the couch. Now I see everyone's trying to launch the pop-up office desk, but he was out of the traps first. Like, I think if the train is leaving the station, it's too late, So he was a great investment, and he still is. And, he's very solid, and just the right person with the right idea, and knew that was the one that he should focus his energies on. So many other people, you'd only just start working with them, they'd have another idea and another idea. They'd be like, they always say that in business you're either like a fox, or like a hedgehog. And a hedgehog solidly goes along and just knows where they're going, and when times are tough they hunker down. Foxes, every bright little shiny thing, they're off chasing it. I'd rather have a hedgehog any day.
Very good. Up in Phoenix Park. So that's the people, that's the idea. And then you mentioned earlier about finance. So would you agree that a lot of maybe people starting out quite don't have a handle on finance, or the importance of it, and have the skills? Well, maybe you want to talk about that for a moment?
Great question, Conor, because I would say that a huge amount of time I will be working with the startup and talking to them about their finances, and realize they haven't a clue. They've got a part-time accountant doing it. I always say to them, if you don't understand your finance, you may as well go and work for someone else, because so much to me, figures are beautiful. And if ever I wanted to do anything, I would worry the figures for weeks and weeks, and I would look at the risk analysis, and I would play around with the revenue and the costs and what might happen, until I felt that the decision I was about to make, not risk-free, but I was comfortable with the ups and the downsides. Whereas in the Den in particular, people blundered in with a warehouse full of something that they thought was the next big idea. I think, going back to your earlier point, that one of the most important things about starting a business is that you have to follow some tried and trusted steps. Like I said, I definitely have a master in startup guru work, but I developed 10 steps, which were not because 10 sounds like a nice number and you always have them on the front cover of magazines, but I think over the years, I realized that if you avoided one of these 10 steps, there was just no point in you continuing on your startup journey. So many people start off, and the first thing they do is they will approach me or other people and say, I have a great idea and I'm looking for money. The very last thing you do, the 10th step, is you look for the money. The first is the idea, and testing the idea and doing your competitor analysis and finding out where the gap is and whether your idea is different to other people's ideas, finessing it, then doing proof of concept, coming out the other side, looking at your strategy, your product, your promote, all the P's. So at the very end, you're at the point where you have a viable business, and the proof of concept has shown that, you can, even if you can make a cent making a cup of coffee in Galway, that you have a viable business under proof of concept. And then you go look for funding. And I always talk to people about the 3 F's when it comes to funding. So, friends, fools, and family. Never go to the 3 F's, because, to be honest, it comes with such a strong emotional tie. It's very hard for you then to continue on your business journey, because family in particular, they can't help it. They're looking at whether you've got a new car, did you go on holiday, you didn't give me the dividend, you're making terrible decisions about your business. Always a bad idea. I'm always picking up people who have fallen out, family and friends, for that reason. I chose for my MBO bank finance. Now, bank finance is unemotional money, which is fantastic. They aren't interested in interfering with your business. But the downside is it's unemotional money. So if you hit the rocks, as most people do during COVID, don't be giving them a sob story. They're not interested. They just want the money. So there's ups and downs. To me, angel investors are great if they're a good match to your business. If, for instance, you just pointed out something around marketing, but Paul Jacob, what he was missing was marketing and finance. He was great at the product. So I was able to provide that. And my brother subsequently stepped in to provide some of that as well. So if you're very conscious of your own limitations and you find a perfect match with an angel investor, then that's great. It can actually add great value to your business. Or if you're at a higher level, obviously an investment company, and going for something a little bit at a higher level. But finance, unless you completely understand the DNA of your business, interesting, Conor, during COVID, that all the people I'm mentoring, one of their weaknesses has been their business plan, has been, looking at the historical figures, testing whether or not some of those might continue. How do they recoup the revenues lost, their cash flow projections? Now, to me, cash flow is everything. You know, I remember putting up a post in the first few weeks after COVID saying, listen, cash flow is not complicated. This is it. You know, get your money in before you pay the money out. But, you know, very few people in business completely understand that underpinning their shiny product and their great big idea, there's a pile of figures that are so important, and they're more beautiful than anything in their business.
It's brilliant that you've got it. It's some great descriptions there on the importance of finance, which I would agree. And I would have been a marketing ideas person who has spent more and more time over as the years go by on the finance and the figures and getting more and more confidence with it, and then also being able to recognize who is a good financial partner and who isn't, because there's a lot of, there's good partners and also those that are a bit of a nightmare. So
voice of experience there, Conor.
Yes, exactly. So moving swiftly along, so COVID has obviously upset everything in business and destroyed a lot of businesses, and people are dealing with a lot of challenges in the super crisis. Is there any kind of maybe any thoughts on yourself and how businesses fundamentally changed, and maybe we will come out of it in X number of months or years, but for the moment, how do people adapt?
In the early stages of COVID, I was mentoring about 24 people, let's say. So the vast majority weren't in Ireland. They were in Africa, India, in South America, across Europe. A lot of similarities, people going through almost the stages of grief, the denial, the anger, the lack of acceptance, the emotional onslaught sometimes of saying goodbye to people and furloughing staff that they felt were part of the family, or, businesses that are founder-led tend to be quite close in terms of friendships and people working closely together. So it took quite a while to get over. Those Zoom calls were, I have to say, like, full of emotion, lots of tears, a lot of people upset, not only that their business was being upended, and it isn't like they were working for the public sector or a solid corporate that would continue to pay them. Their entire family, their ability to pay the bills was built around their ability to keep their business afloat. Even worse when it was partners, two people together who were in the same household, or husband and wife or partners together, and they were both dependent on the business. So I found with some of them that the honest truth, which is true of my own background as well, that people who've been through adversity in their life, people who've had quite a few side swipes, they coped much better. It was like, this is very unfamiliar territory to people who'd never come across tough times, but to people who always felt, a little out of sorts maybe with the normality, they felt more comfortable in it, and they recovered much quicker in terms of being able to see a possible future. The reality in the life of most businesses, there are some that won't be able to continue. They're not going to be in areas that are sustainable, and they're not at a scale, they're probably early startup, that they can survive the next period. In the early days, all of my strategy sessions were, and not just at my level, but I'm talking at EU level, were at 1 year. And now they moved to 2 years. So it was 1 year for vaccine, optimistically, 1 year for distribution and post-COVID. So as of the last few weeks, we're talking about 3 years. So everyone at any level is discussing 3-year strategy plans, which is, again, a year very optimistically for a vaccine. The earliest we've ever had a vaccine before is 4 years. If we do manage to get one out within a year, a lot of people will feel uncomfortable. We've all had, probably history has told us that things that are rushed through, sometimes they come with some side effects and some downsides, so people won't always be comfortable. And then there will definitely be at least a year, if not longer, for distribution to vulnerable groups. There's 2 big superpowers in the world that have virtually pre-booked all of the vaccines. So and then there will be a year for stability. So 3 years is a long time for businesses. I mean, that's the kind of time that any startup would be looking at the mature growth of their business. And we're talking about survival for 3 years. So allowing people to accept that this new phase we're entering into requires a huge amount of science. Like people like Accenture, McKinsey, and KPMG have been doing some sterling work on, I suppose, future-proofing what might happen, when might it happen. In Ireland, we thought we were open. Now we've got a mini lockdown. That could be the future for the next year or so. Travel, anybody in the tourism industry, particularly here in Dublin, it's decimated. People who are in the tourism industry and surviving on that globally, it's decimated at the moment. So in certain areas, I can see that people will have to reimagine their business. There's no other
Yeah.
alternative.
Yeah.
In other areas, so for instance, I've been mentoring a woman here in Dublin who has a dental tech company. For want of a better word, she has the second biggest sort of dental laboratory, and she makes false teeth. So huge business, absolutely huge business. She has thousands, tens of thousands of clients across the nursing home sector and across her own private dental practices, and has been trying for 2 or 3 years to bring in 3D technology and CAD drawing. So up until now, it would be at least 6 sessions for somebody who'd be in a vulnerable group, as in an older person. And also this also covers orthodontics and, the steep rise in implants at the moment. So, but 6 sessions to do molds and impressions, and all very manual, all very involved in terms of the dentist and the patient and the client being in. So the 3D CAD technology allows for just one, and then it's beautifully done and it perfectly fits. You can, most people with dentures complain about them not fit. This perfectly fits. You can run off second, third sets without having to do the whole process again. So for her, COVID was a great way in which she could hone her business plan. I worked with her on that to go for one of the pandemic loan schemes. Probably wouldn't have been seen as something that was quite attractive to the banks beforehand. Definitely attractive now. Very traditional, very solid, absolutely guaranteed customer base, great room for growth. Working in a digital space reduces all of the face-to-face contact that was there before, but it also reduces the price significantly, like by about 2/3. So she's been a joy to work with because she had that ability to think really radically and say, I'm going to go for it. I've always wanted to do this. I think the woman that I'm mentoring in Delhi has a hotel company called On Hotel, aimed at people who want to stay in beautiful homesteads in the lakes and the mountains. Fantastic business. I'm always telling people, if you go to Delhi or India, don't go to the big chains, go and stay with Shilpi and Manish. And of course, their business just collapsed overnight. 100% of the revenue's gone overnight. We'd built up great partnerships with the Time of India and with trail finders and people like that, all gone. And so they've really worked hard, both of them very experienced leaders in the corporate sector before they started the business, but they flipped it to a digital studio, and in fact are going to start specializing in the hospitality sector, which desperately needs that kind of digital help. So for some people, I think it's a tough ask, Conor, to say to somebody, could you strategize at speed now and be the most innovative you ever can be, and when your whole world is on a tilt, not just your business world, but you've got kids maybe at home that you're trying to homeschool, you've got financial worries, you might have illness, everything that happened to everybody else is lesser than what happened to people who owned their own business,
Yeah, totally agree. Just to finish up, is there any books just for sharing your knowledge, books or podcasts or
yes, I have a great one. You might have to wait. Hang on a second now. I'm a total nerd, Conor. So here we go. I live by this book. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy. I have about 15 copies, so you can see it's like a little like Ulysses. You think, but to put it in context, I studied strategy for a big chunk of my life. If there's one skill I can do is work with a business and start developing strategy with them. Then I read this book and realized I wasn't at the races. It blew me away in terms of the ideas it had. So I started reading it, and it's a simple idea, but it's actually like Ulysses. You can read it and it slithers out of your brain. This concept is perfect for 18 to 23-year-olds. They can think this way. There's a little muscle in all of our brains that works incredibly well if we hone it quite young. And as we get older, it goes. It sort of dates back to the idea that, of course, we come from hundreds of years of people inventing things. So back, I walk into this room, here am I speaking to you on this lovely headset, and we're in front of my Mac. I don't know how anything works, but sure, it's all there for me. I have a seat to sit on, I have a table to lean on. But, all of the history of human beings is that we had this part in our brain that said, oh, there's no light. There's somebody there that's going to start working on light or telecommunications. And over time, we're all just bone lazy. We come up with pizza online delivery companies because we see it working for somebody else. We don't come up with original ideas. So blue ocean thinking is based on the premise that there are red oceans, which none of us want to be in, and nearly 99.9% of us are in, where we're all murdering each other, and we're beating each other on price and on quality. And I was once asked by the American ambassador to speak at an event that the Taoiseach at the time spoke at, and it was to say, what 3 things should Ireland do in order to recover from the recession? And I spoke about blue ocean thinking, because we will never, if we were making widgets, we'll never make them faster, better, cheaper than other areas of the world. So we really have to think differently. So ideally, we all want to be swimming in beautiful blue oceans with azure water and nobody else around, and we're all on our own and nobody else is there. But to do that, you have to get your mindset into the ability to think of something that is unimaginable, that doesn't exist. If I go into 12-year-olds and I'll say, close your eyes now, I want you to imagine the room, and they can do it because of Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, they can reimagine that space beautifully. I worked with the Four Seasons group, which is a big fan of blue ocean thinking, or blue ocean strategy, it's sometimes called. And we used to put people in a room, the staff, and say, nothing in the room, there's a stranger coming to the door, what are you going to do? Don't lean on anything else that's existed. Of all the examples of blue ocean strategy that might resonate, back in the day, gaming, my son's a great gamer, was personified by somebody like him, a teenager, kind of a lonesome activity, boys in their rooms on their own, engaged in gaming. And then Nintendo trained all of their staff on blue ocean thinking. And after a while, they eventually came up with a game that saw entire generations from grandchild to grandparent around a television engaged in a game, which was Nintendo Wii. And for the first time in gaming history, women with Nintendo DS. So suddenly they're off in these blue oceans, swimming on their own in this brand new market that nobody thought of. Now it's a bloodbath now, but that came through blue ocean thinking. The other more accessible example is when I was growing up, circuses were ill-kept. There was a lot of complaints about cruelty to animals. They were a low ticket price. Worse, you had to hold them from one venue to another on the back of a lorry. They were primarily aimed at children. And then through blue ocean thinking, a group of people came up with a new concept of a circus, which was a fixed venue, high ticket price, no animals, adults, mainly adult only, which was Cirque du Soleil. So blue ocean thinking for me revolutionized the way I approach business thinking, especially the first of those 10 steps is the idea. And people think that the first idea is the idea. It very rarely is. So having an innovative state of mind is one of the most important things for an entrepreneur, which means they don't get fixated on the one idea they had. And that they have the ability to flexibly think. If I had that idea and in my early stages, I discovered that there's loads of competitors, or it's not unique enough, or my customers don't particularly want it, then, I have to have that mindset that says it could be a better idea. I could reimagine something. Like I always wanted to get my hands on car dealerships. When I was doing the takeover, we did 13 episodes. I went into hotels, gyms, spas, hairdressers, clothing companies, and kicked out the bus and took over for 2 weeks. Great fun. I always wanted, give me a car dealership, because who on earth on the planet said the only way to sell a car was in a glass mausoleum off the side of a motorway with loads of balloons? Like the concept to me is just crazy, because I feel quite intimidating going to a car showroom. I would much prefer there was an easier entry point that allowed me to go in and talk about something else, and then somebody upsell me a car rather than so what kind of car do you want, and what year, what color, what's the make, what year? So I think blue ocean thinking is definitely my little tip for anyone out there who is thinking of, and mine is there's one next to me in the car, there's one next to the bed. The authors, Chan Kim and Rennie Moburn, every time I talk about blue ocean strategy, and I say, don't worry, there's loads of free samples on the web, which there is. They say, thank you so much, Norah, but can you remind people to buy the book? But I definitely would buy the book and there's a new edition just come out because it's great. It's one of those things that, you can pick it up and read bits of it, and then after a while you might put it down, and it's a hard brain. It's very hard brain. Yeah.
I think it's a brilliant recommendation. I'm quite familiar with it, and
Oh, good.
I personally am, yeah, and I do. I think the red ocean, the piranhas gobbling at you is something that I've noticed and I've thought about, and it's always where is that blue ocean?
Yeah,
It is a big challenge in all sectors, especially now. How are people going to reinvent themselves?
And the other one I'd say is just going back to Ashridge. When I went through management education, of course, I was groaning with folders and models, and a lot of people take that with a pinch of salt and say, well, that was the MBA and now I've moved on, this is real life. But actually, a lot of those models are fantastic. They really, really help you to think about your business, even no matter how small it is. And for me, the one I've used an awful lot during COVID is Porter's 5 Forces. Old model, but it's like doing a climate it's like just seeing what the climate is like for your business, doing a snapshot of the weather and forecasting. So the most important thing is all the assumptions that we had before COVID are no longer the case. So things where, in Porters, you obviously have the power balance of suppliers and buyers. So say in my industry, as in print magazines, the power balance of the supplier used to be huge. Back in the day, you couldn't get a print slot for love nor money. They'd charge you an arm and a leg. It was, their market. If you didn't want to fit in on a Monday morning, they had another 5 people that would. So now you can buy print anywhere in the world, and it's quite cheap as a commodity. Very rarely has a high markup anymore. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we had people who bought magazines. And of course, there wasn't a million podcasts and, lots of other alternatives at the time. And they were prepared to put money on the table and buy a magazine. And there wasn't that many on the shelf here in Ireland, even though we sit next to an English speaking neighbor. Whereas now there's no, the buyer has a huge amount of power. They've got very little loyalty. I still publish Woman's Way, which has got a very loyal following. But outside of that, magazine buyers, they don't care which magazine it is. They're just persuaded by the front cover or if they buy it at all. And secondly, the price comparison is quite extraordinary. I remember in one of my business clinics, people coming in and they had developed a business of greeting cards. And they were in Irish, and it was a great idea. And they said, we're launching these greeting cards. And I was like, who sends greeting cards anymore? Like, they're all messages that no, apparently it's still quite a buoyant industry. People like to buy cards for special occasions. And he's sitting in front of me with the card and the envelope, and it's pre-printed. And he said, all that together cost me 50 cents, and I sell it for $3.99. I was just stunned. It was like that moment where I'm selling Irish Tatler, which is like 260 pages with original photography, huge contributor budget, a massive amount of glossy paper and print, and I can't get $2.99 for it. And somebody will walk into a shop and pick up a card for $3.99 that cost 50 cents. So that's, ouch. But that's the power of the supplier and the purchaser, which is all on its head now. So supermarkets, they took all the newspaper advertising, they'd fight over who got the first spreads in every newspaper. And now they didn't have to advertise all the way through COVID. So we're all queuing up outside trying to get into them. So, that's just the nature of the economy at the moment, is that there's certain assumptions we had beforehand about suppliers and buyers, and they're all on the head.
So that's definitely something I'll have a look at as well. I think I've got a copy of that there too. So I'll dust it down and have a look. But I better let you go. I find it like a wonderful chat. Very, very interesting. You've been very generous with your time, and we could talk for hours, I'm sure. But I better let you get.
Thank you.
And hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Thanks for having me, Conor.
Yeah. Thank you, Norah. Thank you so much. Talk soon. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If this is your first time to join us, you are most welcome. And please subscribe for future episodes. This show is shared with you to help you succeed. So please share with others to help them succeed too. At Selfmakers, we believe you can all be your own business. We're here to help self-employed people across the globe accelerate their careers and achieve self-made success. Please visit selfmakers.com and follow Selfmakers on social media. Bye for now.